Monday morning. Crestline Motors parking lot. Giselle Hartley stepped out of her black SUV, spotted the old motorcycle leaning against the far wall, and laughed loud enough for every employee near the entrance to hear. She looked at the group and said, "Whose is that? It looks like someone dragged it in from a junkyard." Nobody answered. A 7-year-old girl named Violet clutched her stuffed bear tighter and looked up at her father. Wyatt Brennan said nothing. He crouched down and tied her shoelace. He did not argue. He did not explain. The motorcycle Giselle had just dismissed in front of a crowd was carrying a secret that would cost her everything she thought she owned. Stay with this story, because that motorcycle was not junk, it was evidence, and it had been waiting 4 years. Wyatt Brennan was 29 years old, and he had learned in the hardest way a person can learn something, that the world does not slow down when your life falls apart. He had learned it 2 years ago, on a Tuesday in April, when a hospital chaplain had knocked on his apartment door at 2 in the morning, while Violet slept in the next room. He had learned it in the weeks that followed packing lunches, finding daycare, figuring out which brand of children's shampoo. Mara had always bought small things that became enormous when you were doing all of them alone. He had also learned that grief has a practical side, and that the practical side never waits. By 6 in the morning on any given weekday, Wyatt was up, dressed, and moving through a routine that left no space for hesitation. Coffee in a steel thermos, Violet's lunch in her pink bag, her stuffed bear a small, worn thing with button eyes and a left ear that had been resewn twice, which Violet called Bolt, placed carefully on top of her backpack. Then the drive to the daycare center 2 blocks from Crestline Motors, where he would walk her in, kiss the top of her head, and tell her he'd be back by 4. The motorcycle was always last. He would wheel it out from the narrow garage behind the apartment building, check the pressure on both tires, run a hand along the left handlebar the way a surgeon checks an instrument before use. It was a 1972 Triumph Bonneville T120, and from a distance it looked exactly like what Giselle Hartley had described. Old, imperfect, held together by stubbornness and habit. The chrome had gone dull in places. The tank had 2 small dents that Wyatt had never bothered to fill. The paint was a deep, uneven black, touched up by hand over the years with a brush, not a gun. But if you crouched beside it and looked under the seat, you would find something that did not belong on a 1972 motorcycle. A compact metal housing, matte black, no larger than a hardback book, bolted cleanly to the frame. Running from it were thin-gauge wires, routed with the kind of precision that does not happen by accident along the fork tubes, down to the brake lines, ending at sensors positioned at angles that seemed arbitrary until you understood what they were measuring. There was nothing decorative about any of it. Every component was there because someone had decided, after a great many failures, that it needed to be exactly there. On the side of that housing, stamped into the metal by hand with a steel punch, were the letters and numbers, ATD Pre 001 WB. Wyatt drove to work every morning. He parked in the far corner of the lot. He went inside, changed into his work clothes, and spent the next 8 hours maintaining the assembly line equipment on the production floor of a motorcycle company, where he had once been something considerably more than a maintenance technician. Hunter Caldwell, who had worked alongside Wyatt for nearly 3 years, and who was one of the few people at Crestline who knew anything about the man's history, once asked him why he always parked in the same spot. Wyatt had looked at the corner, then back at Hunter, and said simply, "It's out of the way." Hunter had not pressed the point. He was good at reading when a question had reached its end. The morning Giselle laughed at the motorcycle was a Thursday in late October. She had come directly from the airport 2 days in Chicago, meeting with the board of directors, defending the budget for the Crestline ARC launch. The ARC was the company's most significant product in a decade, a new sport model built around a proprietary technology platform that would, according to the marketing materials already in preparation, redefine how motorcycles respond to the road. The board had approved the budget, but not without pressure. Not without the kind of questioning that reminded Giselle, as it always did, that inheriting a company from your father did not mean the people in those chairs believed you had earned it. She had been 26 when her father stepped back. She was 28 now, and she still walked into certain rooms, expecting to have to justify her presence. She was tired. She was running on 3 hours of sleep and airport coffee. And when she stepped out of the SUV and saw that motorcycle, that old, battered, inexplicable object leaning against the wall of her company's parking lot, something in her snapped toward impatience before she could stop it. She said what she said. She heard the laughter. She felt, briefly, the satisfaction of having diffused her own tension with someone else's discomfort. And then someone leaned close and murmured that the motorcycle belonged to one of the floor technicians. Giselle looked toward the man standing beside it. He was crouching down, tying a small child's shoelace. The child was looking up at her with dark eyes that held no hostility, only a measuring kind of quiet that made Giselle feel, for just a moment, that she was the one being evaluated. She adjusted. She said it wasn't personal, that it was about the lot's appearance. She said it pleasantly. Then she walked inside, and Jason Merritt, who had been standing 2 steps behind her and who had not said a single word, followed. Isaac Bellamy, 67 years old, 30 years at Crestline, watched the whole thing from near the entrance. He watched Giselle go inside. He watched Jason go inside. Then he looked at the motorcycle. Then at Wyatt, who was straightening up and taking Violet's hand. Isaac's expression did not change, but he looked at the housing under the seat of that motorcycle for a half-second longer than a man glancing at an old bike would have any reason to. That afternoon, during the lunch break, Isaac Bellamy did something he almost never did. He invited Wyatt to eat outside. They sat at one of the picnic tables near the loading dock, a habit left over from the years before the break room was renovated. Isaac ate his sandwich slowly, the way he did everything with the patience of a man who had spent 3 decades watching machines and understood that rushing produced waste. They talked about nothing particular for a few minutes. The weather, a torque calibration issue on one of the line stations that Wyatt had flagged the week before. Then Isaac reached into the chest pocket of his work shirt and unfolded a single sheet of paper. He smoothed it flat on the table and pushed it across to Wyatt without commentary. It was an internal product brochure, draft copy, not for release. On the front was a photograph of the Crestline arc, sleek, aggressive lines, the kind of thing that ends up in magazine spreads. On the back, a list of key technical features. One of them was set in slightly larger type than the rest. Asterisk, adaptive torque distribution, precision cornering stability at variable load and lean angle. Asterisk. Wyatt read the line. He read it again. He set the brochure down on the table with a steadiness that was different from calm. "Who's credited?" he asked. Isaac turned the brochure over and pointed to a line in small print near the bottom. Asterisk. Developed by the Crestline Engineering Division, 2022 through 2024. Asterisk. Wyatt did not look up from the page for a long moment. Isaac waited. "I built that," Wyatt said. Not loudly, not with heat. The way a person states a fact that should not need stating. "I know," Isaac said. "I was there." The older man then explained. In the precise and unhurried way, he explained everything, what he remembered. He had been in the testing bay in the spring of 2020, when Wyatt had presented the ATD prototype results to Jason Merritt and a small group of senior engineers. He had stood near the back and watched Jason's face change as the data came up on the screen. He had heard Jason say, in a voice that carried more than professional interest, "Asterisk. This is what we've been looking for." Asterisk. And he had watched, over the following 2 years, as Wyatt's name disappeared from the project documentation, the way water disappears from a surface on a warm day, gradually, completely, leaving no visible trace. "Does he know I know?" Wyatt asked, meaning Jason. "No reason he would," Isaac said. "I've never said anything to anyone." He paused. "But the patent filing for the ARC goes in about 3 weeks. Once that's submitted, the name on it is the name on it." For a very long time, Wyatt folded the brochure and slid it back across the table. Isaac left it where it was. "Don't let anyone near your motorcycle," Isaac said as he stood and gathered his lunch. "And don't do anything yet." He looked at Wyatt once, levelly. "Come see me tonight." That evening, after Violet was asleep, Wyatt sat in the garage with the overhead light on and the door pulled 3/4 shut. He had a rag in his hand, but he wasn't cleaning anything. He was looking at the motorcycle the way you look at something when you are seeing it for the first time again, after a long time of looking past it. It had started in the fall of 2018. He had been a third-level engineer at Crestline, 4 years into the motorcycle's torque delivery becomes unpredictable at low lean angles on wet pavement. The existing systems compensated after the fact they detected a slip and responded. What Wyatt wanted was something that anticipated the load condition before the instability occurred, distributing torque according to a real-time model of lean angle, surface input, and rider weight, not response, prevention. He had written the first concept on a sheet of graph paper in October of 2018, sitting at the kitchen table, while Mara graded patient charts at the other end. She had glanced over at one point and asked what he was drawing. He had explained it, expecting the polite attention that technical explanations usually receive from people outside the field. Instead, she had picked up the paper, studied it for a moment, and said, "Your distribution curve is wrong. It's too aggressive below 15 degrees. You'll overcorrect on the entry." He had stared at her. She had set the paper down and gone back to her charts. "I'm not an engineer," she said, not looking up, "but I've been on the back of that bike for 3 years." She had been right. He had looked at her for a long time after that. She had gone back to her charts without ceremony, turning a page, making a note in the margin. She had no engineering degree. She had a nursing license, a preference for strong coffee, and 22 months of riding on the back of that motorcycle through every kind of weather and every kind of road. She knew what it felt like when the bike lost its composure below 15 degrees. She had simply never had a mathematical language for describing it. He had provided the language. She had corrected the grammar. The refined version took another 6 months. The prototype real hardware, not simulation, took longer still. Wyatt had used his own money, his own time, and his own motorcycle. There was no budget for what he was doing. It existed outside the official project pipeline, in the evenings and on weekends, in the garage of the house they rented on the east side of the city. Mara had learned to weld on a YouTube tutorial and had redone the mounting bracket twice when the first 2 versions weren't solid enough. The housing they eventually settled on the compact black box under the seat had been her suggestion. "Smaller," she had said. "Make it smaller. If it's going to work, it should look like it belongs there." He had stamped the serial number himself, with a punch set he'd borrowed from Isaac, ATD Pre-001 WB, the first, the original. The proof that this had not come from a whiteboard in a conference room but from a garage and 2 years of failures and a woman who trusted her instincts from the back of a bike. The nights they had spent testing on that stretch of road east of the city were some of the clearest things he still carried. He could reconstruct any one of them in complete detail. Mara in her gray jacket, notebook on her knee, calling out her perception of the bike's behavior as he ran the same corner over and over at slightly different speeds and angles. She had been a good observer. She did not editorialize. She reported the lean felt too sudden. The recovery felt late. The entry this time was the smoothest one yet. He would come back, adjust the threshold by 1/10 of a G, run it again. Sometimes they were out there until 2 in the morning, Violet asleep in the car seat in the back of their hatchback, parked at the side of the road with the hazard lights on. Afterward, they would sit in the car and go through the numbers together. Mara eating crackers from the bag she kept in the console. Him writing in the notebook by the interior light. These were, he understood now with a clarity that time had distilled rather than dimmed, some of the best hours he had ever had. In March of 2020, he had presented the results to Jason Merritt. 6 weeks later, Mara died. She was driving home from a night shift at the hospital when a truck ran a red light. She died before the ambulance arrived. Violet was 2 years old. Wyatt had not gone back to work for 3 weeks. When he did, he went to Jason and asked to step down from his engineering role. He needed the fixed hours. He needed to be home by 4. He needed a job that did not follow him into the evenings, because the evenings now belonged entirely to a 2-year-old who did not understand where her mother had gone. Jason had agreed. Quickly, Wyatt thought at the time, though he had not been in a state to notice things with precision. There had been an email Wyatt still had it in which Jason wrote, "I understand completely. Step down as needed. Your contribution will be recognized at the right time, in the way that fits the moment. Wyatt had believed him. He had not had the energy not to. He sat in the garage now and looked at the serial number on the housing, ATDPRE001WB. He thought about what Isaac had said. 3 weeks. He thought about Violet asleep upstairs, and the bear with the button eyes on her pillow, and the phrase Mara had written on a scrap of paper that he still kept in his tool drawer. Asterisk for Violet. Build something that lasts. Asterisk. He reached for his phone and texted Isaac a single word. Asterisk. Tonight? Asterisk. Isaac's reply came in under 2 minutes. Asterisk. Bring the notebook. Asterisk. Isaac arrived at Wyatt's garage just after 9 with a portable hard drive in a canvas bag, and the unhurried manner of a man who had made a decision and was at peace with it. He sat down on the workbench stool and plugged the drive into his laptop without preamble. I back up the engineering server every year, he said. Have done since 2015. It's a habit. Nobody asked me to. Nobody told me to stop. He navigated through the folders with practiced efficiency. Jason had IT scrub the main server of all ATD source files in January of 2021. What he didn't know was that I'd already made a copy in December of 2020. He turned the screen toward Wyatt. The file was there. Asterisk W Brennan _ ATD _ V 3.2 _ final step. Asterisk timestamp. November 14th, 2019, 11:47 at night. Author metadata, W. Brennan. Wyatt looked at it for a moment, then pulled up his own files on his phone photographs he had taken that morning before work, when the light was good. The serial number on the housing, close and sharp. The mounting bracket, showing the weld pattern Mara had redone. The wire routing, with the sensors at their precise and deliberate angles. He opened his desk drawer and took out the notebook. It was a standard engineering composition book, black covers, college ruled. Nearly 200 pages, roughly half of them filled. The first entry was dated September of 2018. The handwriting was his small, compressed, the kind of writing that develops when you spend years transferring a great deal of information into a small space. There were sketches, calculations in the margins, failed distribution curves crossed out with a single line, not erased. Page after page of a problem being worked at from every direction until it yielded. He set it beside the laptop. Isaac looked from one to the other, then at the motorcycle. The serial number, the file timestamp, the notebook, and the email. Isaac said, "That's not nothing, Wyatt." "Who files the patent?" Wyatt asked. "Charlotte Voss, IP counsel. She's the one who signs off." Isaac closed the laptop. "She turned down a JSON filing 2 years ago, something wrong in the sourcing documents. She doesn't do things because she's told to. She does them because they check out." He paused. "If anyone in this company will look at what you have and take it seriously, it's her." Wyatt nodded slowly. He was already thinking through the timing. 3 weeks. The filing, once submitted, would take the attribution with it into legal permanence. Disputing it afterward was possible, but would take years and money he did not have, against a company with lawyers on retainer. Before filing, there was still a gap, small, closing, but there. He organized the materials carefully. The photographs, printed on copy paper, the file timestamp, captured and printed from Isaac's screen, the email from Jason, printed from his own phone, the notebook, placed last. He clipped them together with a binder clip and held them in both hands for a moment. It was a thin stack, less than a centimeter. He had spent 4 years not thinking about what was in it, and someone had spent 4 years assuming he never would. "This isn't about me getting anything back," he said, not to Isaac specifically, more to the garage, to the motorcycle, to whatever presence occupied the space between what he was doing and why he was doing it. "It's about the name on the thing being right." Isaac stood up. "I know," he said. He picked up his bag and headed toward the door, then stopped. "Don't email her. Find her in person. Jason monitors the company accounts." He looked back once. "And don't let anyone touch that motorcycle." Charlotte Voss was in the building's cafeteria the following morning, a legal pad in front of her and a cup of coffee going cold at her elbow, when Wyatt Brennan sat down across from her without an introduction. He placed a clipped stack of papers on the table, squared them against the edge, and said 3 sentences. "My name is Wyatt Brennan. I'm a maintenance technician on the production floor. I'm the original inventor of adaptive torque distribution, and what you're holding is the documentation." Charlotte looked at him. She looked at the papers. She picked them up and started reading. She did not ask background questions. She did not soften the process with pleasantries. She read the way engineers read, working through the logic of each piece, testing the sequence, looking for the gaps. She spent the most time on the email from Jason. She read it twice, then set it on the bottom of the stack and moved to the file timestamp. When she had gone through everything, she closed the notebook and set it on top of the pile. Then she looked at Wyatt with the expression of a person who is reorganizing their understanding of something they thought they already understood. The attribution was removed from the source documentation in January of 2021, she said. It was not a question. I found out 2 days ago, Wyatt said. You've been here since 2020. You were present when the ATD concept was developed, and you've said nothing until now. I didn't know the ARC was using it until 2 days ago. I stepped away from the engineering side in 2020. I wasn't tracking what happened after. She was quiet for a moment. Then, walk me through the algorithmic choice, the torque distribution function, what type, and why. Wyatt answered without hesitating. The function was an exponential, with a variable exponent driven by the lean angle sensor and a secondary input from the inertial measurement unit. The threshold for activation was 0.3 G. The reason for an exponential, rather than a linear function, a linear distribution was insufficiently sensitive below 15 degrees of lean, which was the range in which the system's usefulness was greatest. He had tested linear for 6 months before abandoning it. Charlotte wrote 2 lines on her legal pad. Then she said, "The patent draft for the ARC doesn't include a rationale for the exponential function. It states the function but doesn't explain the derivation. There's no development history in the filing, no record of the failed approaches. Because the people who wrote the draft weren't there for the failures," Wyatt said. Charlotte put her pen down. She looked at him steadily for a few seconds, the look of someone conducting a final internal audit before making a call. "I need 48 hours to verify independently," she said. "Don't contact me through the company system. Don't discuss this with anyone except whoever helped you gather this." She took the stack of papers. "And leave the motorcycle where it is. Don't move it. Don't let anyone near it." She stood up, gathered her legal pad, and walked out of the cafeteria. She did not say anything reassuring. She did not tell him it would be all right. What she did instead, and Wyatt recognized this, and found it more reassuring than any promise was, take the papers with her. Hunter had been sitting one table over. When Charlotte was gone, he turned to Wyatt and said quietly, "You just went all in." Wyatt put his thermos back in his bag. "No," he said. "I just asked for what was already mine." 24 hours later, Jason Merritt called Wyatt into his office. It was a corner office on the 3rd floor, the kind of room that announces authority before a word is spoken. A wide desk, a credenza with framed industry photographs, a view of the production floor through a glass wall. Jason was standing when Wyatt entered, hands in his pockets, which was a posture Wyatt had always found deliberately casual in a way that was actually the opposite of casual. "Close the door," Jason said. Wyatt closed it. "I heard you spoke with Charlotte Voss." There was no point in softening the conversation. Wyatt said yes. Jason nodded slowly, as though receiving a piece of information he had expected but was taking his time with. "I want to walk you through something," he said, moving behind his desk, but not sitting. ATD was a group project. Your early phase work was part of a larger process. The version that made it into the ARC is the result of 2 additional years of development by a full engineering team after you stepped away. That's the standard product development cycle. Concepts evolve, teams change, contributions are absorbed into the final work. He spread his hands. "You know this. You were an engineer." Each sentence was technically defensible. That was the architecture of it, no single lie. Only omissions, shaped carefully enough to function like one. "I know what I submitted in March of 2020, Wyatt said. "I know what I gave you, and I know what the ARC is running. The function is the same. The sensor placement is the same. The threshold is the same. The only thing that's different is whose name is on it." Jason looked at him for a moment. Then he placed a single sheet of paper on the desk and slid it toward Wyatt. It was a screenshot of an email, the one Wyatt had sent to Charlotte the previous morning, through the company server. Using internal communications to build a legal challenge against company IP decisions is a policy violation, Jason said. His voice had not changed. It had the same measured, reasonable tone. I don't want to create a problem for you. You have a daughter. You have a good situation here, but you need to think carefully about what you're doing. Wyatt looked at the email printout. He looked at Jason. You wrote me a message in June of 2020, he said. You told me my contribution would be recognized at the right time. He paused. I've been waiting 4 years. How much longer is the right time? Jason said nothing. Wyatt picked up the email printout, set it back on the desk, and walked out. That night, at 11:23, Charlotte called his cell phone. She had verified everything independently. The serial number, ATDPRE001WB, appeared in an internal specification document from 2020, labeled as the Time Source Prototype, *, and had been manually removed from. It was not a system migration error. Someone had gone in and taken it out. She could not, she said, tell him who had done it. But she could tell him that she was no longer able to sign the patent filing until the attribution question was resolved. That's not a favor, she said. That's my job. The filing has to be clean, and right now it isn't. Wyatt thanked her and sat for a long time in the dark of the living room. Through the door to the garage, he could see the outline of the motorcycle under the light he'd left on. He thought about Violet's question from that morning in the parking lot. Asterisk, Daddy? Aren't you sad? Asterisk. He thought about his answer. Asterisk, I know what the motorcycle does. That's enough. Asterisk. He thought about how that had been mostly true for 4 years, and how it was no longer entirely true. He opened his phone and typed a message to Charlotte. Asterisk, I'm not stopping. Tell me what comes next. Asterisk. Charlotte requested an emergency internal review meeting. 3 people, herself, Giselle Hartley, and Jason Merritt. The stated reason, a documentation issue requiring resolution before the patent filing could proceed. Giselle walked in expecting a procedural matter. Jason walked in expecting to manage it. Charlotte placed 2 documents on the conference table, the ARC patent draft and Wyatt's evidence package. She did not begin with conclusions. She began with a question. The serial number ATDPRE001WB appears in an internal specification document from March of 2020, designated as the source prototype for the ARC's ATD system, she said. That reference was removed from all subsequent filings in January of 2021. I would like to understand the basis for that removal. Jason produced his answer smoothly. Standard product evolution. Prototype designation made obsolete by the commercial development phase. No attribution was required for preliminary source hardware once the production version superseded it. Charlotte listened without interrupting. Then she said, under IP documentation standards, all material prior art contributed by identifiable individuals requires attribution regardless of supersession, unless a formal assignment agreement was executed. I've reviewed the employment and project records. No assignment agreement exists for ATD work, predating January of 2021. She looked at Jason, which means the attribution was removed without a legal basis for doing so. Jason pivoted. He questioned the scope of Charlotte's review. He suggested that the floor-level employee behind the challenge lacked the standing to contest company IP decisions. He used words like times procedure, times and times, channel times and times appropriate escalation, asterisk. He was very good at it. Every sentence closed a door. Charlotte did not follow him through any of them. She was not unkind about it. She simply kept returning to the documentation. Giselle said almost nothing for the first 20 minutes. She had been listening. Not in the way she sometimes listened in meetings, tracking the surface of the conversation for her cue to speak, but going deeper, reconstructing. The ARC's technical presentation had come through Jason. The engineering summaries had come through Jason. The attribution on the patent draft had come through Jason. She had reviewed all of it, approved all of it, and never had any reason to look further back than the documents she'd been given. Charlotte turned to her directly. At the time you reviewed the ARC's development history, were you provided with documentation predating January of 2021? Giselle's answer, when it came, was precise and honest. No, I received a summary. It did not include individual contributor names, because those names had already been removed. Charlotte said. The silence that followed was not the silence of a room waiting for someone to speak. It was the silence of something settling into its permanent position. Jason made one more attempt. He said that a maintenance technician with a personal grievance using internal resources to disrupt a major product launch was a threat to the company. He used the word times stability. Asterisk. He said it was Charlotte's responsibility, as IP counsel, to understand the larger implications of what she was doing. Charlotte said, "My responsibility is to ensure that what we file is accurate. Right now, it isn't." She closed the folder in front of her. "Until the attribution is correct, I won't be signing the filing." The meeting ended without a resolution. Giselle left last. In the elevator going down, she stood with her hands at her sides and thought about a man crouching in a parking lot, tying a child's shoelace, saying nothing, because he had learned somewhere along the way that saying nothing was a form of patience, not defeat. She thought about a motorcycle she had laughed at. She went to find him herself. No assistant, no scheduled meeting, no intermediary. She walked down to the production floor on a Wednesday afternoon, in the same work dress she'd worn to the executive floor, and she found Wyatt Brennan doing exactly what he was paid to do, checking the torque calibration on a line station, methodical, unhurried, alone at the far end of the bay. She stood about 3 feet away and waited until he looked up. "I want to understand," she said. "Not times I'm sorry, asterisk, not times I need to fix this. Asterisk. Just that." Wyatt set down his torque wrench. "Understand what? Why you didn't say anything. Before this." He considered the question honestly. "Because when my wife died, I couldn't fight for something and also be a father at the same time, and I thought Jason's word was worth something." He paused. "By the time I had the capacity to look back, I thought the window had closed. I wasn't watching the arc. I wasn't watching anything except Violet." Giselle was quiet. Around them, the production floor moved at its ordinary rhythm, the hiss of pneumatics, the steady percussion of the line. "The morning in the parking lot," she said. "You were right about what it looks like," Wyatt said. "The outside. You just hadn't seen what was inside it." "What's inside it?" 4 years of work. My wife helped build it. She's not here anymore, so she can't tell you herself." He said it without self-pity, which made it harder to hear than self-pity would have been. Giselle looked toward the window that gave onto the parking lot. The motorcycle was still there, in its corner, the same spot it had been every morning for as long as anyone on the floor could remember. "What do you want?" she asked, not with resistance, with genuine openness, as though she had cleared the deck of her own assumptions in order to hear the answer correctly. Wyatt told her. His name in the patent. A royalty arrangement, 8% of the ARC line, paid into a dedicated fund. Not for himself. The fund would support safety research grants for young engineers. It would carry his wife's name. He had already thought about the name, the Mara Brennan Safety Fund. Giselle asked if he wanted his engineering role back. He said no. He wanted to pick up Violet at 4 o'clock every day. He wanted to be exactly where he was, doing what he was doing, with his name attached to what was his. She asked if he was asking her to deal with Jason. He said that was her decision, not his. He wasn't asking her to punish anyone. He was asking her to make sure the record was right. There was a long pause before Giselle spoke again. She was looking at the line station, at the row of identical components progressing through their identical checks. Then she looked at Wyatt and said, "The motorcycle, does it still run?" "Yes," he said. "It's run since the first day." She nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the elevator without another word. 3 weeks later, Crestline announced a brief delay in the ARC patent filing 2 weeks for documentation review. Internally, the reason was understood. Jason Merritt went on indefinite personal leave that same week. Nobody heard from him after that. There were no press releases, no public statements. Some things are resolved without performance. Charlotte Voss met Wyatt in the cafeteria on the first Thursday of November, just as the light was going gray outside and the building was beginning to empty for the evening. She placed 2 copies of an attribution agreement on the table, the kind that had been drafted by a real attorney with real legal weight. Wyatt read every line. There was no rushing him. He spent 11 minutes on it, which Charlotte considered, privately, a very reasonable amount of time. At the bottom of the first page, under a section labeled Times Primary Inventor. Asterisk was his name. Asterisk Wyatt Brennan, 2018 through 2020. Asterisk. He signed both copies. He slid one back to Charlotte. He put the other in his bag. This should have been done 4 years ago, Charlotte said. Wyatt said, 4 years late is better than never. She almost smiled. It was a near thing. The Mara Brennan Safety Fund was established 6 weeks after the ARC's official launch. The fund provided 3 annual research grants to engineers under 35 working on motorcycle safety systems, active prevention, not passive response. The application criteria were simple. The project had to address a real-world failure mode. It had to have a working prototype, and the applicant had to be able to explain why every design decision had been made the way it had been made. The logo was a clean line drawing of a lean angle, a curved road, a tilted profile, a single number indicating the threshold below which the system began its work. 15 degrees. Wyatt had written the fund description himself, in the same compressed handwriting as the notebook. He had spent 2 evenings on it, Violet doing her homework at the other end of the kitchen table, occasionally asking him what he was writing. He said he was writing something important. She had nodded and gone back to her subtraction worksheet without further comment, which was exactly the kind of response he had come to expect from her and which, every single time, made him feel that Mara was still somewhere in the room. The fund received 47 applications in its first year. Giselle stood at the ARC launch event and introduced the motorcycle to a room full of industry press and buyers, and on the screen behind her, in the technical specifications slide, beneath the heading Times Adaptive Torque Distribution, asterisk was a single line in a smaller font. Asterisk Original Concept and Prototype. W. Brennan, 2018 through 2020. Asterisk. It was not a headline. It was not accompanied by a speech or a ceremony. It was just a line. Accurate, permanent, and exactly where it belonged. Wyatt was not in the room. He was at the daycare center pickup at 4 o'clock. It was a Tuesday in late November when Violet ran out of the daycare building and wrapped both arms around her father's waist before he had finished coming through the door. She had Bolt under one arm, the bear's button eyes pressed into his jacket. She had something on her face, a little chocolate from the afternoon snack, and she was already talking about something that had happened at circle time before Wyatt had finished saying hello. He walked her to the parking lot. They went past a group of younger employees clustered near the entrance, looking at the paper brochure someone had printed from the ARC launch coverage. One of them pointed at the specifications page. W. Brennan, who's that? The other shrugged. Hunter Caldwell, who happened to be walking in the opposite direction, heard the question and kept walking without slowing down, but his expression, for just a moment, was the expression of someone who knows the punchline to a joke that no one has told yet. Wyatt stopped at the motorcycle. He took his keys from his jacket pocket and did the thing he always did, one hand on the left handlebar, a brief check of both tires by pressure of the wrist. Violet put her hand flat on the tank. She studied the motorcycle with the concentrated seriousness that 7-year-olds bring to things they have decided deserve their full attention. She looked at the housing under the seat, the black box with the serial number, and then she looked up at her father. "Daddy," she said, "you built the road first. Everyone else just drove on it." He did not ask where she had heard that. He did not ask what she meant, because she meant it exactly as she had said it. He crouched down to her level the way he had crouched down in the parking lot on the morning of the laugh, tying her shoelace, not answering, and this time he looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes were Mara's eyes. Her patience was Mara's patience. The bear under her arm had been sewn twice by a woman who was not here. Mom would have liked hearing that, he said. Violet nodded as though this were obvious. "I know," she said. Then she climbed up onto the back of the motorcycle the way she always did, one foot on the peg, up and over, and settled herself behind him with Bolt held carefully in both hands in front of her. Wyatt straightened up. He put on his helmet. He started the engine. The sound it made was what it had always made. Not perfect, not new, not the sound of something that had been polished for an audience. It was the sound of an engine that had been built to last, and had done exactly that. It filled the parking lot for a moment, recognizable and unhurried, and then Wyatt pulled out of his corner spot, and out of the lot, and onto the street. Cleveland, in November. the streetlights coming on early, home at 4 in the afternoon. Under the seat, in a box stamped by hand, the serial number was exactly where it had always been. ATDPRE 001WB. The first, the original. The thing that had been built in a garage, tested on empty roads at night, and carried 4 years in silence, until the silence was no longer the right answer. Mara had said, asterisk, build something that lasts. Asterisk, he had.